Chapter 7. Armed struggle is the only way to liberate Palestine. Between 600,000 and 750,000 Palestinians either fled or were driven out of their territory upon which the State of Israel was established and which it conquered during the War of 1948 through 49. The Arabs vowed to destroy the newborn state, and the Israeli leadership believed that if their precarious, vulnerable country was to have any chance of surviving, there had to be as few Arabs as possible within its borders. This was the rationale, however, morally questionable, behind both the expulsions and the blanket refusal to allow any refugees to return, ever. Refugees were settled into Gaza, a 141 square mile strip formed along the southwest coast of Mandatory Palestine as a result of the 1948 and 49 war, controlled by Egypt until 1967, and by Israel since. The West Bank, the name given by Jordan to the 2,270 square mile territory it controlled after the 1948 war and formerly Mandatory Palestine. Israel captured this territory in 1967, and other ramshackle camps in neighboring Arab countries where the ruling regimes blustered that they eventually would wipe out the Zionists from the map and return the Palestinians to their homeland. But that was mostly lip service. In reality, those regimes imposed harsh conditions of their own on the unfortunate refugees who often had no rights, no significant control of their lives, no respect for higher education or worthy employment. Living conditions were poor, and so were public health and even food security. The refugees who poured into the Gaza Strip during the 1948 and 1949 war more than tripled the area's population. From about 70,000 inhabitants in 1945, the number rose to about 245,000 in 1950. By 1967, there were 356,000 inhabitants, and by 2015, there were 1,710,000. Oh, that's the end of the sentence. That was read too poorly. I'm going to try that again. From about 70,000 inhabitants in 1945, the number rose to about 245,000 in 1950. By 1967, there were 356,000 inhabitants, and by 2015, there were 1,710,000. The refugees had become stateless people, cast out of their own country and unwanted by any other. But they and the permanent Palestinian residents of the villages and cities in the West Bank and Gaza still consider themselves a people. In the squalid camps, young militants organized themselves into nationalist movements driven by pride of self and hatred of Israel. Among them was a boy named Khalil al-Wazir, who had been born in Ramlah, a town southeast of Tel Aviv, in 1935. During the 1948 war, he and his family, along with many other residents of Ramlah, were deported to Gaza, where they lived in a refugee camp. By the time he was 16, al-Wazir already was the leader of one of the militant groups. Eager to avenge his family's deportation from Ramlah, al-Wazir said he sought out Mujahideen, who had taken part in the 1948 Palestinian War, so that he could learn from their personal experience in the battle. Those veterans of the 48 war trained al-Wazir and his friends, and they, in turn, trained other young Palestinians. In 1953, when he was just 18 years old, al-Wazir commanded 200 young men, all passionately motivated to fight the Zionist enemy. At the end of 1954 and the beginning of 1955, al-Wazir's men began a series of sabotage and murder operations inside Israel. The Egyptians, using the young militants as cheap proxies, sent reinforcements of Palestinian students from Cairo to Gaza. Among them was a young electrical engineering student at the University of Cairo, Mohammed Yasser Abdel Rahman, Abdel Ruf Arafat al-Qudwa al-Husseini, or, for short, Yasser Arafat. Arafat's place of birth is disputed. According to the local Palestinian version, he was born in 1929 in Jerusalem and might be expected from a Palestinian leader, However, it has also been argued that Arafat was born in Gaza or even Cairo. Regardless, he came from an important Palestinian family with ties to the Grand Mufti Haj Amin al-Husseini and to Abd al-Qadir al-Husseini, the commander of the Palestinian forces in 1948, both of whom were primary targets for assassination at that time. Arafat, who took the nom de guerre Abu Ammar, and al-Wasir, who took the name Abu Jihad, became associates and confidants. They worked together to strengthen the Palestinian cells in the Gaza Strip. Nevertheless, Israeli intelligence was not overly concerned with the festering militancy in the refugee camps. In general, one could say that the Palestinian diaspora really didn't interest us, as Aharon Levron, who served as an Amman officer at the time. They did not constitute a significant force then. Rather than a long-term strategic issue, the militants were considered an immediate tactical problem, a concern only to the extent that they slipped over the borders to harass and terrorize Jews. And that problem ostensibly had been solved by the 1956 Sinai campaign. Egypt, fearful of Israeli reprisals and more concerned with preserving peace on the border than with the plight of the Palestinians, stopped sponsoring those raids. The militants, however, did not see matters the same way Abu Jihad and Arafat blindsided and betrayed. Read that way too poorly. The militants, however, did not see matters the same way. Abu Jihad and Arafat blindsided and betrayed when the Egyptians prohibited further infiltrations, decided the Palestinians could end their plight only by engaging in independent operations. Israel's military victory in the Sinai campaign, which stopped the terrorist infiltration by Palestinians from Egyptian territory, thus also inadvertently led to the creation of a separate guerrilla movement. After years of roaming from the country to country, in late 1959, Arafat and Abu Jihad relocated to Kuwait. They had come to realize that in the eyes of Nasser, who was trying to unify the Arab world under his leadership, their activities would only be seen as obstructions. They knew that as long as they stayed in one of the major Arab cities, they would never manage to create an effective all-Palestinian organization under their own authority. Abu Jihad accepted the supremacy of Arafat, but was 6 years his senior, and who already possessed a wide network of ties across the Palestinian diaspora. Arafat regarded himself as a leader, but he immediately identified Abu Jihad's operational capabilities, something he himself lacked. For 2 years, Arafat, Abu Jihad, and 3 comrades worked on developing a series of principles and operational frameworks for their organization. They did so in secret to avoid arousing the opposition of the Arab states. Finally, on October 10, 1959, the Palestinian Liberation Movement was officially established. They soon discovered, however, that the Arabic acronym of their name, Hataf, spelled a word that ingloriously translates as quick death. So Abu Jihad, who had a special sensitivity for symbolic matters, proposed that the letters be reversed to form the acronym Fatah, which means glorious victory. The basic principles, disseminated at the time in the form of leaflets, would later be concentrated and expressed in the Palestinian National Covenant. Article 9 states, Armed struggle is the only way to liberate Palestine, and Article 6, in effect, calls for the deportation of all Jews who had arrived in Palestine after 1917. Article 20 notes claims of historical or religious ties of Jews with Palestine are incompatible with the facts of history, nor do Jews constitute a single nation with an identity of its own. They are citizens of its states to which they belong. Article 22 mentions that Zionism is racist and fanatic in nature, aggressive, expansionist, and colonial in its aims, and fascistic in its methods. Most of the covenant's strictures against Zionism allege that it is a tool of international imperialism. Israeli intelligence, preoccupied with Nasser and convinced that Egypt posed the most credible and formidable threat, completely missed the founding of Fatah. It wasn't until early 1964, more than 4 years after the fact, that 2 Israeli spies filed the first field reports on the organization. Yuri Yisrael, known in the Mossad as Ladiyah, Ladiyyah, and Yitzhak Sagiv, Yisrael is what he's known as, working under the cover of Palestinian businessmen, warned that the cells of students functioning with Fatah's support and inspiration were gaining more and more momentum in Europe and should not be belittled. On April 6, 1964, with the entire Mossad tied up with the affair of the German scientists, Ladiyah wrote to his Mossad handlers, warning, "I am coming to the conclusion that the danger we face from the scholars, students, and educated Palestinians is of no lesser significance than the arming of the Arab states with weapons of mass destruction." At first, their Mossad case officers were unimpressed, dismissing Arafat, Abu Jihad, and their friends as students and intellectuals stronger with words than with actions. But Lydia and Yisrael persisted, warning that their Palestinian acquaintances were speaking with increasing frequency about the armed struggle against the Zionist entity. Fatah was something entirely different from anything that had existed before. They insisted, in a May 1964 report, "These two, Arafat and Abu Jihad, are capable of inspiring Palestinians against us."